Are you ready for the third P of podcasting? Man, you guys are cruising through this material. Today we're going to talk about how to produce your podcast. So you've done your prep, you've done your planning. Now we're going to talk about producing your show. And I've created this great PDF for you guys. It's called Episode Checklist. If you haven't already, download the checklist, laminate it somehow, because this is going to be your go-to guide to make sure you produce your episodes from beginning all the way up through editing and publishing it to your podcast host provider. And so there's some critical steps that you need to make sure you follow, and this guide is going to make sure you do everything without a hitch. And today in our video, we're going to go over this checklist, and I'm going to give you some additional tips as we go through the material to help you with your workflow. Sound good? Are you ready? Let's dive into this. The first thing we're going to talk about is prepping for the show. Some of this is going to be review. We've covered some of this material before, but it's really important that you take the time and schedule your episodes in advance. Schedule those recordings. I recommend doing it 3 months in advance. That helps you plan. You put it on your calendar. You may even want to consider doing some bulk recording, which we're going to talk about in a future video, but that will help you really stay organized to know what you're doing for your podcast and when you're doing it. Once you've got those dates set up, you're gonna do research. You're gonna research your topic. If you have a guest or multiple guests, you're gonna research your guests, and you need to do that in advance. Don't sit down to record and then think you're gonna research your guest on the fly. It rarely works out, and you really just come off looking a little bit unprepared. Next, we're gonna write our script, and I'm a big advocate of the host actually writing the script. If that's not how you have things set up, if you have an assistant or producer mainly writing your scripts, that's okay. Just make sure you get the scripts in advance. Read everything out loud. If anything is scripted, read it out loud. Feel free to make changes, because what's most important is that the material comes off as very conversational and organic. The last thing you want to do is read someone else's script where you're not really sure what it says and you didn't take the time to read it in advance and it sounds really choppy. That's what we don't want. So make sure you get the script in advance and you have a chance to manually go through, read it out loud, and make sure it sounds good and like something you would normally say. Next, you're gonna create your recording link. And this is for people who are using some sort of remote recording service. If it's just you recording directly into your computer, you probably don't have to go through this process, and we're gonna explain that a little bit later when we talk more about recording. But you do need to have a link. If you're inviting guests to participate in your podcast episode, you need to have a link to send them to so you can record together. Next, update master episode guide. We went through this, right? Your master episode guide lists all the information that's important about each of your episodes. Now, you'll continually update this guide really throughout the episode process, but I want you to be thinking of that now. So what's some information you could put right away in your episode guide? You could put the name/episode number for your podcast, right? So in the case that I provided you guys, the example, my show is called Preggy Pal, so it was PP001, PP002. So you can set that up. You can think of your podcast, your episode title in advance, right? So you can do a little bit of research. Remember, we want to put keywords in that title because it is SEO optimized, so search engines can pick it up. And that includes the podcast apps that are going to be, where people are going to get your episodes. So you want to make sure those titles have a lot of those keywords in it. You can say who your host is, who your producer is for the show, who your editor is going to be. You can list your guests. So there's definitely some information that you can include even at this stage. And we want to make sure that we're continually updating that master episode guide. The next thing we're going to talk about is preparing your guest. So you already have your recording date set up on your calendar. You know when it's convenient for you to record. Now you've got to make sure that those dates line up with the guests that you want to have on your show. I always think it's a good idea, and I mentioned this in a previous video, to have some sort of online calendar scheduling system That just makes it really easy, and all you have to do is send them a link and they can look at your recording dates and pick the date that works best for them. You need to send them that link though, so that's the calendar link that I'm talking about. Send them the link so that they can schedule a time to record with you. You also need to send them a link to the script once the script is available, and send them the recording link. In the sample script I provide you guys, I actually put the recording link inside the script, right? It's kind of part of, it's before the main title of it. It's right at the top. So I list the day of recording and the time zone, which is really important, and then right up there is the actual recording link. I think that's really smart to do. You want to not bombard your guests with a ton of emails and a ton of information, so the more you can condense it, the better off you're gonna be. But you gotta send them the script and you gotta send them a recording link. I also send my guests a release form, and I think that's really important as well. As the owner of the show, you need to make sure you always have the rights to your show. And if you leave it open-ended or a little bit ambiguous, it's possible for a guest to fight you on that in the future, or to force you to take down an episode or something like that you may not want to do for important reasons. So you always want to make sure that you have a release form signed, and I'll provide you with a sample release form as well, so you can check that out. And the last thing that you're going to get from your guests is you're going to want to request any marketing materials that you may need. And I'm thinking about what you may need once the episode is, published and you want to promote the episode. A lot of people ask for a photo, bio, perhaps you want their social media links so you know how to tag them when you start promoting the episode. Information like that is always important to get in advance, so you have it. All right, so that's preparing your guests, and now we're moving on to before you hit record. So don't hit the record button yet. There's certain prepping that you need to do before you start recording. The first is testing mics and headphones. That's the most important thing, and I mean test it for yourself. In fact, I would hop on the recording link earlier, right, just to test it for myself, because the moment your guest comes on, you want to be prepared for your guest. Make sure you do all of your stuff in advance, so once your guest hops on, the focus can just be on your guest. But test the mic, test headphones. Also check the equipment settings. So usually if you're using an online recording system, there's a settings page. Make sure the proper mic and headphones are coming up. It's connected, right? It's pulling up the right mic. There's nothing more frustrating than having all of your equipment plug in, and you think that it's recording because you plugged it in, and then you realize on the settings page it was actually pulling from the mic on your computer as opposed to your external microphone. And that makes a world of difference in sound and the overall quality of your podcast. So please, not only check your mic and headphones, but check that settings page to make sure the computer is recognizing the right equipment. You may also want to check your internet speed, and there is a great website to check. It's called speedtest.net. There's also an app that you can download to your phone if you want to just click a button and go to it as well. And what's really important about this is that everyone has the highest internet speed possible. And you may need to play around with this a little bit, because someone may say, oh, I've got super fast internet. And they probably do. But if they're at home and they've got kids that are on the computer, and then their spouses streaming a movie, like all of that takes up your bandwidth, right? And maybe you typically have, 20 megabyte upload, but when everyone else is on it, you really have more like 3 or 4. And it truly can be that drastic. So I always tell people, I say, listen, if at all possible, make sure other people are off the internet. And so it's just you, and so we can get the highest internet speed possible. But you can go to speedtest.net and check that out. Now, some practical things, right? We want our environment to be as quiet as possible. And I've listed some specific things that have kind of made a mess for me in the past, and I don't want you guys to have to go through this. So first, make sure you mute or silence your cell phone and tablets. That's so important, right? And I would even say if you put it on vibrate, be careful, because your phone on vibrate next to a microphone you're still gonna hear it vibrate. So get it out of the room, put it on silent, make sure it's not a distraction. And please don't be one of those people that texts and does stuff like that when you're supposed to be recording. It's just really disrespectful. Make sure you mute all that and you set it aside so it's not troublesome for you. Next, and this is kind of along the same lines, silence your computer notifications. I don't know about you, but during an average day when I'm not recording, my computer is pinging and going off and making all these noises when I get a new email, when something is downloaded to a folder. You know, I get a ton of notifications. So make sure you go in and turn off those notifications. Next, close any extra computer programs. Why do I say that? Why should we close unnecessary computer programs? Well, your computer only has so much power, okay, to open up multiple apps and to allow you to use those apps without it, kind of freezing up. And so if you're recording, you want to make sure that you close down those programs. You don't want anything to potentially interfere with the quality of your recording. And having apps open that you're not using, especially the ones that take up a ton of memory space, right? The ones that take a lot of power to run. And I'm talking about the Photoshops, any kind of video game stuff, that kind of stuff, shut it all down. Only keep the apps open on your computer that you're going to use for the recording. So maybe it's a browser, right? You need to have a browser anyways to do this kind of remote recording that we're talking about. But I usually like to have a browser open anyways if I need to do some research. So if the guest says something and I need to type something in and do a little bit more quick research on something just so I can respond to the question, I may have a browser open, but shut down the mail and anything else that's going to be a distraction for you. Next, practical tip, close your doors and windows. I know, we want to get that nice, lovely breeze in the room. And fans, I'm gonna add fans to that too, because it makes noise. Like, we tune this noise out because we hear it all the time. So we don't even hear it usually. But man, when you are done recording and you push the play button to listen to what you recorded, you're like, what in the world was there? What kind of traffic was going past my house? Or, oh my goodness, I heard the fan the entire time. So it's amazing when you really just focus in on one sense, like your sense of hearing, you can hear everything. And that is what your listener is going to hear as well. So make sure you close doors and windows and turn off fans. Next, tell everyone you're recording. Now, that's not the whole world necessarily, although I have done that. I have published some stuff on social media. I've taken like a selfie or something and said, hey, I'm recording with so-and-so. So you can do that, but that's not actually what I'm referring to here. I'm referring to anyone in your house. So if they don't know that you're recording, they're probably gonna be loud or do what they would normally do. So make sure you tell them that you're about to record so they know. And along those lines, also consider pets, right? We love our pets. My little dog, he's literally sitting over there in his little doggy bed. And most of the time he's quiet, but sometimes he gets really loud. So if you need to take your dog, your animal, put him or her in another room, have your kids play with the dog, whatever you need to do. I'm gonna lump animals in that category too, because there can be a lot of extra noise and you don't want that, obviously. Next, and it's so funny that I'm about to give you this point now because I was just thinking this in my head. Make sure you have some water. Grab some water. In fact, I'm gonna show you. This is what I typically have right here. This is just water, no ice, because ice will clink against the glass or plastic in this case and make a ton of noise. So you just want water, fill it up, make sure it has a lid on it because, oh my goodness, the last thing that you'd want to do is accidentally knock this over and it goes all over your equipment, right? That would be really, really bad. But make sure you have some water because you will get parched. And I was just thinking that. I'm like, my throat is like really parched. I should have grabbed some water. So here we go. I'm gonna model what you should do, right? Lovely water. All right, next you're gonna welcome your guest. So once your guest joins the recording link, of course you're gonna welcome them. You're gonna thank them for being on the show. I would establish a little bit of chit chat. When you schedule these recording times, I always allow at least 15 minutes, additional minutes, usually at the front before we start recording, to just get to know them a little bit. Unless you've had a chance to do a pre-interview, you've called them on the phone and talked to them in advance, you really need to establish some sort of relationship with your expert. And there's nothing more weird than them coming on and you saying, okay, you ready to record? It's like, who are you? Oh my goodness, how am I supposed to come off and be natural? I know nothing about you. So it's really important to have that kind of natural conversation with your guests. So welcome them and perhaps do a little bit of chit chat. How you doing today? Oh, my kids were doing this. Oh, I do that with my kids. Whatever you want to say, right? Just make them feel comfortable. Next, make sure you review the script with your guest. I love sending the scripts in advance and I love sending them through a Google Doc. So I'm literally just sending a link. And the reason I do that is I ask the guest to pull up the script on their computer and then we go through it. I tell them, okay, off the top, this is what's gonna happen, then we're gonna transition into this, then I have some announcements, then we're gonna do this segment, and I literally walk them through the process. Now, they probably have had their script in advance, but they may have questions, and I always ask at the end, what questions do you have? Is there anything that I missed here that we should be adding? So go through it with your guests so your guest feels super comfortable. And then overall, just tell them what to expect in the recording process. So I like to, you're already on the recording page, so I like to go through and explain what they're looking at on the recording page, how do they mute themselves if they need to mute themselves. I also give them some basic tips about, hey, if you make a mistake, just start from the previous sentence or pick it up, previous paragraph, if you will, or the last train of thought that you had, and keep going. I always tell them it's not live. Trust me, that really helps, even though everyone kind of knows this isn't live. Just tell them, look, this isn't live, it's okay, I make mistakes too. If you make mistakes, that's fine. Stop, back it up to the previous sentence so we can edit out the mistake and it sounds as natural as possible. So that's what I'm talking about when I say tell guests what to expect. I also like to go through with them, what happens if we get disconnected? Because that's a big question that people have when you're recording remotely. You're all on this recording page, but what if someone loses internet access, loses power or something like that? How are you going to reconnect? So I always go through that in advance. If you've got an issue, try to rejoin the recording page. If you have any problems, text me. That's another thing. If you can get their phone number, that's always better than just having an email address because there's nothing more frustrating than trying to troubleshoot a tech issue via email. So if you have their number, that's great. You can text or call them and figure out what the tech issue is. But let them know what to expect with the actual recording process. All right, we're moving on. We're talking about what to do now during the recording. And I know this sounds kind of silly, but the first thing is hit the record button. Okay, this is bound to happen to you at some point. If it does, give yourself a little bit of grace because we've all been there. And it usually happens because you're chatting with your guest and then all of a sudden it kind of goes into the topic of the show and you're just having a natural conversation, which is fantastic. The problem is you didn't hit the record button, so no one's gonna hear this fantastic conversation. So hit the record button. I should have made that in red. Hit the record button. Next. And you kind of got to play producer. Hopefully, you have someone else that can do this, but I know a lot of times we are our own producer, editor, everything. So as you're listening to what your guest is saying, you also need to be listening for any audio issues, right? On your end and for all of your guests. So be listening for those things like the crazy fans, like a dog barking in the background or kids playing or things like that are going to detract from the episode. So you kind of have to wear multiple hats in this situation if you don't have a producer or sound engineer to listen to that for you. Next, listen to your guest, right? All your prep work, again, should have been done in advance. So now is the time to just have a great conversation. Now you know how to have a good conversation. We do it day in and day out with our friends, with our family. You need to apply those same skills here. Throw all the research kind of out the door that should be in your brain by now and just be human. And when we're human, we're listening to what the other person is saying. We're not thinking about how am I gonna transition this and what's gonna be my next question? No, you really can't do that. Worst case scenario, you forget the next question you're gonna ask, and there's some silence that you or your editor can edit out later. Not a big deal. What's worse is if you're not listening to your guests and they say something that really does require my next point, which is a follow-up question, and you don't even ask. So this is what happens. Your listener is listening to the episode because every normal person would have asked a follow-up question to that, and you didn't. You have your list of questions, and you're going through, and well, that question wasn't on there, so I'm just gonna go to the next one. You guys, you really have to just be engaged in the conversation. Like I said, be human, and you'll have a great interview. Next, watch your episode length. All of these online recording systems have a timer. The moment you hit the record button, you're gonna see a timer that is counting how long the episode is. Be mindful of that. One of the biggest mistakes I think people make in the recording process with these remote recording systems is they'll have multiple pages open in their browser and they don't have the recording page in full view. So they don't see that timer. And they're just going on and on and on, and before you know it, you're at the midway point in your episode and really should be wrapping up your episode. I mean, it really does happen, especially again, if you're doing all this yourself and you don't have a producer or someone to remind you. So make sure you're always checking out the episode length, and you kind of got to gauge. You may have to, in your script, you may have to on the fly, get rid of some of the interview questions or combine them. You're gonna have to think a little bit on your feet with that. If it's too difficult to do that and listen to your guests, like I said, just stop for a second, gather your thoughts, because you or your editor can always go back in and edit out that blank space. All right, what do you do when you're done recording? Well, just like we needed to hit the record button when we started recording, you need to stop recording. So go hit the stop button, and the next part of this is to gather your files. If you're using an online recording system, a remote recording platform, usually what happens is it records to everybody's computers and then it uploads to a server. You can have some issues, and especially if your guests have not so fast internet, you may have some issues getting the files from their computers to a server where you can grab them. That happens sometimes. So what I typically do is make sure that I, as the host, stay on the recording page until I have everybody's file. I do not leave until I know that their files have been uploaded and I can grab those files and edit them to, do what I want to do with them. If you don't, and if you leave, just assuming it's gonna kind of happen, you could have some problems which would require the guest to come back to the recording page. It's a big mess, all right? So make sure you have the files, and I would go a step further. Once you have the files, I would download them and I would listen to them. Because there's nothing more frustrating than thinking a recording turned out well, and then you go to edit it or hand the files off to your editor, and somebody was using the wrong mic and it sounds horrible, or something didn't record properly. So make sure that you listen to the files as well. I know this is an extra step, and I know when we're done recording, we just wanna move on to the next thing, boom, 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 but this will save you, some major problems if you go ahead and just listen, make sure you've got what you think you have. Next, organize your episode folders and your files. So you may not want the files to be called whatever they were recorded as, right? So someone joins the recording page and they make up a silly name for themselves. Well, you may not want that name to be what you call that person for filing purposes. So after you download the files, just go through, make sure you're labeling things so you know what is what, and you're putting them in the right folders. Don't just leave stuff on your desktop. Oh my goodness, please don't do that, because it is a nightmare. Once you download them, label them, like I label mine with my episode number, so like PP001, PP002, I label it that way, and then I just put the person's name. So PP001, Sunny, PP002, Jenny. right? And I know exactly what episode it belonged to and whose file that is. And then I put it in the right folder, and then I can, put it on my little storage unit, and I'm good to go until it's time to edit, which brings us to our next point, edit and upload, which is the final thing we're gonna talk about today. You need to determine if you are gonna edit your episodes or you're gonna hire someone else to edit your episodes. We have a whole video that goes over this and explains it a little bit more, and even shows you some of the steps, very basic, but shows you some of the steps needed in order to edit so you can make this decision. If you are editing your own content, one of the best pieces of advice I have is to create a template. So usually you're using kind of the same things in each show. So you've got your theme music in the beginning or some sort of intro music, and then you've got this pre-recorded piece that goes here, and you use this music when you go into your commercial breaks. And your editing system will allow you to create a template of this. So you can just drag and drop your files into your timeline, which is my second point, and you can edit from there. Really, editing is just a game of slice them and dice them. What do you want to take out of your episode? What's going to make it flow the best? And then adding those extra components, those sound files, music, things like that are pre-recorded, adding those to the timeline and editing as needed. So that's basically how you edit. There can be a lot more involved in it, that's the basic structure. So if you are editing, follow those quick steps. Let's talk about break times. Break times could be promos. Break times could be ad spots. Doesn't matter, the same concept applies. And I highly encourage you to create these spots in your show. What I'm typically doing if I'm editing an episode is I'll edit the entire episode and I'll build in these breaks, and right before I export, I go back and I look at the time code for when these breaks would hit, when they would start. And then I use my master episode guide, which I provided with you guys. There's a column for mid-roll spots. So I go in and I add whatever that time code is to that document, because you're gonna need that information depending on how you run these spots and what podcast host provider you use. You're gonna need those time codes when it comes time to upload your episode. And then it's really just a matter of exporting the file. We always export as an MP3. That's the main thing you need to know. Most of the settings are pretty standard. You really don't want your file to be too big, and we talk about this more when we talk about exporting your files, but just keep that in mind. You want to keep your files pretty small, I would say between 20 and 30 megabytes if possible. So you're exporting your file. Then you take that file and you upload it to your podcast host provider. And along with that, you're gonna add titles, descriptions. There's some additional information. They usually ask for your rating. Is it clean? There's different things. You can do subtitles, a bunch of things. You can add artwork, right? We talked a little bit about artwork. You can add your artwork for that specific episode if you want. So make sure everything is filled out properly. And then the last thing you're gonna do is you're gonna schedule your episode for release. I do recommend that you do all this in advance, so you're not like hurrying up like right at the last minute trying to get an episode out. Try to think in advance, plan in advance, and schedule those so that you're not totally freaked out and worried when tomorrow is the date of release and your episode isn't done yet. Try to schedule that for release. So that's our episode checklist. Honestly, guys, this has been a lifesaver for me. As you create your workflow and you determine what programs you're using and how to best use those programs, you may want to come up with your own checklist that's a little bit more detailed on specific things that you typically forget to do, or make sure you do this in the program, then do this. You may want to create something that's a little bit more specific, but this is a great start for you guys in creating a workflow for your episodes that really does work for you.